The story of the Buddha, born as Siddhartha Gautama, is one of the most revered and widely told narratives in human history. It is a story not merely of a man, but of an awakening that shaped civilizations, inspired millions, and continues to offer profound insight into the human condition. Buddhism, the religion and philosophy he founded, is rooted in his life's quest to understand the nature of suffering and the path to liberation. In examining the life of Buddha, we do more than trace historical events. We engage with a spiritual journey that transformed not only Siddhartha Gautama, but also the course of world history. This story delves into the intricate details of the Buddha's life, from his royal beginnings to his renunciation, enlightenment, teachings, and enduring legacy. Siddhartha Gautama was born around 563 BCE in the town of Lumbini, situated in what is now modern-day Nepal. This region during his time was part of ancient northern India and comprised several small republics and kingdoms. The Shakya Republic, into which Siddhartha was born, was a part of the Kosala kingdom. It operated more like an oligarchic republic than a hereditary monarchy, although King Suddhodana, Siddhartha's father, was regarded as the ruler. The Indian subcontinent at the time was experiencing a cultural and spiritual renaissance. Philosophical ideas were flourishing. Questions about existence, the soul, suffering, and liberation dominated intellectual discourse. The Upanishads, which formed the philosophical core of Hinduism, were being composed. Renunciants, called Shramanas, were challenging the rituals of Brahmanism, advocating personal spiritual practice. Siddhartha's life would be deeply shaped by and eventually rise beyond this context. Queen Maya, Siddhartha's mother, was traveling to her parental home in Devadaha when she gave birth in the Lumbini gardens. Legend holds that she stood holding a branch of a sal tree when Siddhartha was born from her right side, clean and unsoiled. Immediately after birth, he took 7 steps, each marked by a lotus blossom, and declared his intent to achieve final liberation. The infant's birth was accompanied by miraculous signs. Flowers fell from the sky, sacred music played, and wise sages and gods rejoiced. Astrologers predicted the child would either become a great universal monarch or a fully enlightened Buddha. To sway him toward kingship, King Suddhodana resolved to protect Siddhartha from all forms of suffering and spiritual influence. To fulfill the prophecy of worldly greatness, Siddhartha was raised in luxury, surrounded by beauty and shielded from all unpleasant experiences. He lived in 3 opulent palaces, one for each season, and was constantly attended by dancers, musicians, and servants. He excelled in all princely pursuits, from swordsmanship to statecraft. He married Yasodhara, a beautiful and intelligent princess, and they had a son, Rahula. Yet even amid this splendor, Siddhartha experienced a sense of restlessness, a subtle yearning for deeper truth. This inner disquiet would soon transform into an existential quest, the 4 sights and the Great Renunciation. At age 29, Siddhartha convinced his charioteer Channa to take him beyond the palace gates. What he saw would change the course of his life and the world. An old man, frail and hobbling with age, shocked Siddhartha, who had never seen aging before. He learned that old age comes for everyone. A sick man, writhing in pain, revealed to him the reality of physical suffering and disease. A corpse, surrounded by mourners, showed him the inevitability of death. A wandering ascetic, calm and serene despite material poverty, inspired him with the possibility of spiritual pursuit. These 4 sights awakened Siddhartha to the universality of suffering and the impermanence of worldly pleasures. His carefully curated existence collapsed into a spiritual crisis. That very night, Siddhartha resolved to leave behind his royal life. He looked upon his sleeping wife and son one last time and departed the palace quietly, riding into the forest with Channa. There he shaved his head, donned a simple robe, and began the life of a wandering ascetic. This act, known as the Great Renunciation, marked a turning point in spiritual history, a prince choosing truth over power, renunciation over indulgence, and universal compassion over personal ambition. Siddhartha first sought out teachers like Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta, who taught him techniques of deep meditative absorption, jhanas. Though he mastered these practices quickly, he realized they could not bring permanent liberation, as they only offered temporary peace. Unsatisfied, Siddhartha turned to severe asceticism, believing that self-mortification might liberate the spirit from the bonds of the body. In the forests of Uruvela, Siddhartha practiced extreme austerities, fasting, breath-holding, exposing himself to the elements. At one point, he was so emaciated that he could touch his spine from his belly. 5 other ascetics joined him, believing he was close to liberation. But after years of struggle, Siddhartha realized that such self-denial only weakened the body and mind. Enlightenment, he concluded, could not be attained through pain or pleasure. He accepted a bowl of milk rice from a village girl, Sujata, breaking his fast and prompting the 5 ascetics to abandon him. The middle way and enlightenment refreshed, Siddhartha resolved to follow a middle way, a path of moderation. He sat beneath a fig tree, the Bodhi tree, near the Neranjara river and vowed not to rise until he attained enlightenment. For 7 days and nights he meditated, confronting inner demons, desires and fears personified by Mara, the Lord of Illusion. Mara tempted him with sensual delights, fearsome armies, and even challenged his right to seek liberation. Siddhartha remained unmoved. On the night of the full moon, he attained complete and perfect enlightenment. He saw his past lives, understood the workings of karma, and penetrated the nature of suffering and its cessation. He had become Buddha, the awakened one, turning the wheel of Dharma. After his enlightenment, the Buddha hesitated to teach, thinking his realization was too subtle for others to grasp. But Brahma Sahampati, a divine being, implored him to share his insight for the benefit of all beings. He traveled to the deer park in Sarnath and found the 5 ascetics who had abandoned him. There, he delivered his first sermon, known as the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, setting in motion the wheel of Dharma. In it, he introduced the 4 noble truths. Life contains suffering, dukkha. Suffering arises from craving, tanha. Cessation of suffering, nirvana, is possible. There is a path to the cessation of suffering, the Eightfold Path. These teachings formed the foundation of Buddhist philosophy. The 5 ascetics became his first disciples, forming the nucleus of the Sangha, or monastic community. The Buddha would spend the next 45 years walking across northern India, teaching kings, merchants, farmers, and untouchables alike. The Sangha grew rapidly, and eventually women, after some initial resistance, were allowed to join, thanks to the insistence of Mahapajapati Gautami, the Buddha's foster mother. Inclusiveness of his teaching. The Buddha rejected caste distinctions and emphasized ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom. He taught that liberation was possible for all, regardless of gender, class, or background. His teachings included detailed analyses of consciousness, ethics, perception, meditation, and metaphysics. Years after his renunciation, the Buddha returned to Kapilavastu. He was received with reverence. His father, Suddhodana, eventually became a disciple. His son Rahula became a novice monk at age 7. Yasodhara too joined the monastic community for women. These events illustrated that spiritual awakening could coexist with love and family, as long as attachments were relinquished. Not all were pleased with the Buddha's success. His cousin, Devadatta, tried to seize leadership of the Sangha and even attempted to kill the Buddha. Despite this betrayal, the Buddha responded with patience and compassion. At age 80, sensing the end of his life, the Buddha undertook a final journey. He fell ill after eating a meal, possibly spoiled, prepared by a blacksmith named Kunda. Despite the pain, he He continued to teach his disciples. He delivered his final sermon at Kushinagar, emphasizing the impermanence of all things and urging his followers to take refuge in the Dharma. The Buddha passed away lying between two sal trees surrounded by disciples. His last words were, "All compounded things are subject to decay. Strive diligently for your own liberation." He entered parinirvana, the final and complete liberation beyond rebirth. Soon after his death, the first Buddhist council was convened in Rajgir. Ananda and Upali recited the Buddha's discourses and monastic rules, which were preserved orally and later written down as the Tripitaka. Vinaya Pitaka, monastic rules. Sutta Pitaka, discourses of the Buddha. Abhidhamma Pitaka, philosophical and psychological analysis. These texts became the canonical foundation for Buddhist practice. Spread across Asia. Under Emperor Ashoka, 3rd century BCE, Buddhism became a state religion and spread across Sri Lanka, Central Asia, and eventually to China, Japan, Tibet, and Southeast Asia. Over centuries, Buddhism evolved into various schools. Theravada, the way of the elders, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar. Mahayana, the great vehicle, China, Korea, Japan. Vajrayana, the diamond vehicle, Tibet, Mongolia. Buddha's insights into the nature of suffering, mindfulness, and compassion have influenced psychology, neuroscience, ethics, and global peace movements. Mindfulness-based therapies draw heavily from Buddhist meditation techniques. The image of the serene Buddha remains a universal symbol of peace, inner clarity, and transcendence. The life of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, is not simply the story of an extraordinary man who attained spiritual enlightenment over 2.5 millennia ago. It is, more importantly, the timeless narrative of a seeker, a person who questioned the meaning of life, challenged the assumptions of his time, and transcended suffering through inner transformation. As we reach the end of this detailed exploration into his life, it is essential to not only summarize the stages of his journey, but also delve deeper into the philosophical, cultural, and practical legacy that continues to influence humanity on both spiritual and secular fronts. Siddhartha Gautama's decision to renounce the world, despite being heir to luxury and power, is one of the most radical acts of spiritual courage recorded in human history. It is tempting to dismiss his story as legend, but its psychological and emotional truths resonate deeply with human experience. His departure from the palace was not born of hatred for the world, but from compassion for all beings caught in the cycle of suffering. He did not flee from responsibility, but embraced a much larger responsibility, not to rule a kingdom, but to help all sentient beings discover liberation from suffering. This moral courage underlines a central Buddhist teaching. True strength lies not in the conquest of others, but in the conquest of the self. Siddhartha's renunciation represents a symbolic moment for humanity, a declaration that the ultimate truth cannot be found in material wealth, social prestige, or sensual pleasure. These things may offer temporary satisfaction, but they inevitably lead to dissatisfaction and fear of loss. By walking away from a world that promised everything except inner peace, Siddhartha pointed to the deeper treasures that lie within. The middle path as a revolutionary idea. The Buddha's path to enlightenment unfolded through painful trial and error. He experimented with both extremes, the indulgence of the palace and the self-mortification of ascetic life. He eventually realized that neither could offer liberation. Instead, he discovered the middle way, a revolutionary path of balance, mental discipline, and compassionate wisdom. This insight was radical in its context. At a time when religious extremes were common, either sensual ritualism or severe asceticism, the Buddha offered a path that emphasized moderation, mindfulness, and ethical action. This middle way remains a cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy, and continues to guide individuals in navigating modern life, which too often swings between overindulgence and burnout. The Enlightenment, personal awakening, universal message. The Buddha's moment of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree was not a mystical event reserved for the divine, but a profound realization about the human condition. Through deep meditation, he pierced the illusion of a permanent self and understood the nature of suffering, its origins, and the path to its cessation. This realization did not result in personal escape alone. Rather, it marked the beginning of a life wholly dedicated to alleviating the suffering of others. His enlightenment was simultaneously individual and collective. By understanding the interconnected nature of existence, dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, he uncovered a universal truth. All things arise due to causes and conditions, and nothing exists independently. This insight laid the foundation for Buddhist psychology and metaphysics. It teaches that suffering is not random, nor are we doomed to repeat it. By understanding the causes, chiefly craving and ignorance, we can begin to uproot them. Enlightenment, therefore, is not an esoteric concept reserved for the elite. It is a possibility open to anyone willing to investigate their mind and cultivate insight. Compassion and non-violence, ethical foundations. Perhaps one of the most enduring aspects of the Buddha's life was his unwavering compassion. From his first sermon to his final words, the Buddha emphasized kindness, non-violence, and compassion as foundational to a meaningful life. He welcomed all, regardless of caste, gender, or background, and treated each person with respect and dignity. In a time and culture heavily stratified by caste hierarchies and ritual purity, the Buddha's teachings offered a radical egalitarianism. He invited untouchables, prostitutes, kings, and outlaws alike to enter the Sangha and walk the path to liberation. This universal compassion has made Buddhism one of the most inclusive spiritual traditions in the world. Moreover, the Buddha's ethics were rooted not in fear of punishment or reward, but in the understanding of cause and effect. Acts rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion lead to suffering. Acts born of generosity, love, and wisdom lead to peace and liberation. His teachings empower individuals to take responsibility for their actions and to live with intentional awareness. The creation of the Sangha, the monastic community, was another groundbreaking move. In it, the Buddha established a model for spiritual fellowship, ethical living, and communal support. Monks and nuns renounced worldly life to pursue the Dharma full-time, offering lay people a living example of ethical discipline, mindfulness, and wisdom. But the Sangha was not only for monastics. Lay followers were equally important in the Buddha's vision. Through generosity, dana, ethical conduct, sila, and mental development, bhavana, anyone could progress on the path, regardless of whether they were monks or householders. This dual path structure, monastic and lay, ensured the spread of Buddhism beyond temples and monasteries. It embedded Dharma into villages, homes, and marketplaces, making it a living practice rather than a distant doctrine. After the Buddha's passing, his teachings were preserved, transmitted, and eventually spread throughout Asia. They were embraced by emperors, translated into dozens of languages, and absorbed into diverse cultures. The result was the flowering of multiple Buddhist traditions, including Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Each tradition emphasized different aspects of the Buddha's teachings, yet all honored the core principles of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the Middle Way. From the serene temples of Thailand to the majestic monasteries of Tibet, from Zen gardens in Japan to forest monasteries in Sri Lanka, the Buddha's influence has shaped architecture, art, philosophy, and cultural values for centuries. Even in the West, where Buddhism arrived much later, it has taken root as a spiritual, philosophical, and psychological movement. Mindfulness, a key component of Buddhist meditation, has become a global phenomenon, integrated into clinical therapy, education, corporate training, and daily life. This widespread relevance underscores the timelessness and adaptability of the Buddha's insights. The psychological depth of the Buddha's teachings. Modern psychology has increasingly recognized the depth of Buddhist understanding of the mind. Long before the advent of neuroscience, the Buddha described the conditioned nature of thought, the transient character of emotions, and the power of mindfulness to liberate us from destructive patterns. Practices such as vipassana, insight meditation, and shamatha, calm abiding, offer systematic methods for observing the mind and cultivating awareness. The Buddha's focus on intention, attention, and mental habits aligns closely with contemporary research into neuroplasticity and emotional regulation. Importantly, Buddhism does not reject suffering, but invites practitioners to investigate it. This honest and courageous approach provides a refreshing alternative to avoidance or denial. By looking deeply into our pain, we come to understand its roots, and through that understanding, we develop the capacity for healing and freedom. Buddha as a human model, not a god. One of the unique aspects of the Buddha's story is its humanity. He did not claim divine origin, nor did he position himself as a god to be worshipped. Rather, he presented himself as a way-shower, one who discovered a path that others could also walk. This emphasis on personal responsibility and inner inquiry is one reason why Buddhism appeals to both spiritual seekers and skeptics alike. It does not demand blind belief, but encourages experimentation, observation, and insight. The Buddha famously said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This spirit of inquiry makes Buddhism not only compatible with science, but a partner in exploring the nature of consciousness and well-being. The challenge and hope of the path. While the Buddha's message is ultimately optimistic, offering a way out of suffering, it does not promise quick fixes or divine intervention. The path he outlined requires effort, discipline, and self-awareness. It asks us to look into the most uncomfortable aspects of our minds and take responsibility for our choices. Yet it also offers profound hope. It says that no matter our circumstances, our past mistakes, or our current pain, we can transform. Through mindfulness, ethical living, and compassionate insight, we can break the chains of craving, fear, and delusion. In this way, the Buddha's story is not just a tale from ancient history. It is a mirror for our own journey. It reminds us that we too can wake up. A message for the modern world. In a world marked by increasing anxiety, environmental crises, social polarization, and existential uncertainty, the Buddha's teachings are more relevant than ever. His emphasis on inner peace, ethical conduct, compassion for all beings, and the impermanence of all things can offer deep guidance amid the chaos of modern life. Mindfulness practices help reduce stress and increase mental clarity. Compassion practices cultivate empathy in a world often dominated by self-interest. Ethical precepts encourage responsibility, integrity, and balance in our interactions with others and the environment. Furthermore, the Buddha's understanding of interdependence resonates with ecological awareness. Just as nothing exists independently in the mind, no organism survives independently in nature. Recognizing our interconnectedness can foster more sustainable and compassionate ways of living. More than 2,500 years after his passing, the Buddha's presence is still felt, in silent meditation halls, in the chanting of monks, in the quiet breath of a practitioner sitting cross-legged under a tree, in the smile of someone who has learned to let go. Statues of the Buddha adorn altars around the world, but the true Buddha is not found in stone or scripture alone. He is found in the living practice of the Dharma, in every moment of awareness, every act of kindness, every effort to understand and transcend suffering. To study the life of the Buddha is to study the potential of human beings. It is a reminder that awakening is not a myth but a possibility within us. It tells us that suffering is not our enemy but our teacher, and that freedom is not found in escape but in seeing clearly. The Buddha's journey from prince to wanderer, from seeker to sage, is both ancient and immediate. It invites us not merely to admire him, but to follow him, not in worship, but in wisdom. As the Buddha said before his final breath, "Be a lamp unto yourselves. Work out your own salvation with diligence." This, perhaps, is the greatest tribute to his life, a call to awaken, not later, but now.